Hi, I'm Tammy Haschig with Haschig Homes of William Raveis Real Estate. And you've undoubtedly seen a lot in the media over the past year regarding the real estate industry. And today I want to clarify a few things and clear up a few misconceptions of what's out there so that you as a consumer, a buyer or seller knows what these changes means to you. In order to do that, I want to give you a brief history lesson on the industry, the real estate industry, so you can understand how we got to where we're at now. The early 1900s, real estate's the wild, wild west. Anyone can practice it and charge whatever they want. Around 1908, the National Association of Realtors is formed to try and bring some structure and form to the group. Unfortunately, no laws are really enacted at that point, so there's not a lot of change. By the 1930s, we see some standardization with about 6% being the typical rate. In 1950, however, the Supreme Court gets involved and they say that's price fixing, it's illegal. However, 6% still remains the norm. Move forward about 40 years or so, we get to the early 1990s and we start to see the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, get involved and say, you know what, we have a problem here. People are showing up to open houses and meeting with listing agents and believing that that agent represents them and has their best interests, and they write up an offer with that agent. That's not right, because the listing agent represents the seller. And this is important because this is really the beginning of buyer agency, so that both sides are fairly represented, both the seller and the buyer. In order to do that, I want to give you a brief snapshot of the history of the industry so that you can understand how we got where we're at today. In the early 1900s, real estate's the wild, wild west. Anyone can practice it and charge whatever they want. So by 1908, the National Association of Realtors is formed to bring some structure and consistency, but without laws being enacted, not much changes. By the 1930s, we see, a normalization of the rates right around 6%. So this becomes the new norm. However, in 1950, the Supreme Court ruled that this is price fixing, it's illegal. However, 6% remains the norm. In the early 1990s, the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, gets involved because they're starting to see a problem. Buyers are showing up at open houses, putting in an offer with a listing agent, believing that that listing agent is representing them as well and has their best interests at heart, when really the listing agent represents the seller. So this is important because this is really the impetus for buyer agency, which of course makes sense. Both sides should be fairly represented. With the changes in the early 1990s, we get what's called the mass disclosure form, which is a form that you should be completing with an agent who's working with you, representing you prior to seeing a home. This form outlines the various roles that real estate agents can play in the transaction. And this is really a consumer protection piece to make sure you understand who represents you, who doesn't, and what their duties are to you. Now, where that all plays into this conversation is the fact that the norm, it becomes the norm that the seller pays both sides of the real estate transaction. They pay the seller's real estate commission and the buyer's real estate commission. The reason this happened was it evolved because it made sense. Buyers already have to come up with a great deal of money to purchase a home, and including the real estate commission on top of that would make that process even longer and more difficult for most people to buy a home. So it made sense then for sellers to pay for the buyer's real estate commission. It makes sense now in most cases. So why the air quotes? Well, it's simple. The buyer is the one bringing the money to the table. The seller is paying for the buyer's agent commission, and that the commission's deducted from their net proceeds. So, what do you think? Well, I can tell you, that's how we ended up where we are today, in part. The reason for the lawsuits really initiated by some sellers who thought, you know what, I was never informed that I had the option to not pay the buyer agent fee. It was presented to me as this is the way it's done. And honestly, that was the way it was done because it made sense. Not because anyone was withholding information or options, but that just became SOP, standard operating procedure, because it made sense. Our Haschig Homes team has always had many conversations leading up to the sale or purchase of a home with our clients, including what the commission is and what services you could expect for that commission. We pride ourselves on that. We always have open, honest communication. It's very important to us. We love what we do. The people we work with are very important to us. So we want to be clear during each transaction and make the process as simple as possible. So what does this mean to you as a seller? You should expect, as always, that your agent clearly communicates with you what commission they are charging, what you can expect for that commission, and be open to discussion. You can ask them, is this fee negotiable? As with any service provider, whether it be a tradesman, a doctor, a lawyer, any profession, you're allowed to set a rate that you desire. You as a consumer have a right to ask if that's negotiable. That's always been the case. What can you expect in terms of these changes if you're a buyer? Well, as a buyer, one big new change that's being implemented, although our team has typically always done this, is that a buyer needs to sign a contract with their agent. That contract will outline what the agent's commission is and if the buyer is responsible to pay that commission if the seller of the home that they're interested in is not offering it. So it clearly outlines responsibilities on both sides. This is always a good idea. And also as a seller, you have the option to choose if you want to offer buyer agent commission or not. In many cases, it still makes sense to do so. Again, because of the prohibitive costs involved in purchasing a home, this gives more options and hopefully opens up your buyer pool. However, you have options, and we would discuss the different strategies with you and determine what works best in your situation. You're in the driver's seat, as you always have been. At the end of the day, you want an agent who represents you, your best interests, who listens to you and wants to know what's most important to you. You want someone who's open, honest, transparent, and experienced. Having many years of experience is important in that an agent who's gone through many transactions has experienced lots of the different ups, downs, hurdles, obstacles that can come your way and can smoothly guide you through that process. We're here to answer any questions you have and happy to help. Good luck in your journey.